And welcome everybody. As we get started, I am Bill Brown. I am the Director of Congregational Vitality. Hold your breath for the Baltimore-Washington and Peninsula Delaware Episcopal area. And tonight I am joined by the Reverend Dr. Matt Johnson, who is, want to get this right, he works with the Fletcher Group and is working to help faith-based organizations grow their impact within the recovery ecosystem in their communities. He's been a pastor, a church planter. He's empowered his congregation to engage in recovery work in their West Virginia community. He is the founder of the Abundant Life Recovery Housing Network, a nonprofit recovery residence organization in West Virginia, and his experienced founder and operator of Recovery Housing. Matt is a sought after public speaker, and that is why he is with us tonight to share his insights and his expertise around churches getting involved in recovery ministry. As we get started, I want to first open us with a word of prayer, then we'll do some housekeeping. Let us pray together. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering us together from across multiple states, the District of Columbia, united together not just through technology, but through the power of your Holy Spirit. Give you thanks for Matt's passion for helping and serving those and working alongside those in recovery, and pray that your wisdom and your spirit would be upon him and upon all of us so that we would gain some insight, wisdom, and understanding to be in ministry to those within the recovery community. Guide us now as we come together to learn from Matt and from one another in the name of Jesus. Amen. As we get started, I'm going to open up the chat and just give you an opportunity to drop in the chat where you're watching, who you are, what church you're with, and where you are watching us from tonight. As we're doing that, if you have questions tonight as Matt's presenting, we invite you to drop those into the Q&A. Please don't put your questions in the chat. I will lose them, and it is easier to track it in the Q&A, and we'll ask Matt those questions as he goes throughout his presentation. Also, we are recording tonight's Training Tuesday. It is the first Training Tuesday of 2026. I've got the date right, so I'm excited about that. And we will provide the recording link, and we will provide Matt's slide deck sometime later this week or early next week on all of the different websites of both annual conferences and of the Episcopal area. So without further delay, Matt, welcome tonight to Training Tuesday, and we are so glad you could be with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I love getting a chance to talk about this work and about ways that churches can be more involved. I ended up doing this morning for a different recovery piece. I ended up doing a spot on a local radio station. So a local radio station called me and said, "Hey, can you come in and talk about this?" And so I did. And I was talking to my dad this evening before I jumped on this call, and I said, "Dad, I did a spot on this local radio station today." And he said, "Oh, so you're an influencer?" I said, "I don't think influencers do work on local radio." I said, "I'm doing a webinar tonight." And he said, "So you are an influencer?" And I said, "I don't think you understand what that word means." So, but maybe I am, and I'll claim it. But it's great to be with you and to get a chance to share some of the work and some of the things I've learned about recovery ministry and why I think it's so important. I think it's such a crucial part of the work that we're doing and ways that the church can be engaged and involved in the world. So, as Bill mentioned, my name's Matt Johnson. I'm a United Methodist pastor. I serve in West Virginia and have served in West Virginia for 12 years. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, spent some time in Kentucky, and have been in West Virginia since 2014. I'm appointed in Extension Ministry, and so my ability to work with the Fletcher Group is my appointment, and I do that helping churches and faith communities all over the country figure out how to be better participants in the work of recovery. This is not the work I ever envisioned for myself. This is not how I ever thought my life would go. I was actually a church planter. And so coming out of seminary, I planted a new church in northern Kentucky and fully intended to be a church planter who planted a church and turned it into the next, Church of the Resurrection or something like that. And that never happened. And I learned early on that sometimes fruitful is not the same as successful, and that's one of those things that we learn to sit in that tension. But it was one of the things that started to really draw me to folks who had also been through their own set of challenges and helped me see that there was a different way forward. The fact that I do recovery ministry now is a little surprising. When I was church planting, we couldn't figure out a place to meet, and I really wanted to meet new people, so I started going to the local bar that was at the end of my street, and we started playing bar trivia. And it started as my wife and I playing bar trivia twice a week, turned into about 40 folks who would show up from across the community to play bar trivia with us. And eventually I looked at the bar owner and said, "Can I have church at your bar?" And he gave me the keys to his bar. I baptized him and his bar manager and performed their wedding. And so I have served communion off a bar top. And that's how I started my ministry. And now on the other end, I work with folks that are trying to find healing and wholeness from a place of substance use. So you never know where God is going to take you. I never thought I would do this. In 2018, the senior pastor at the church I was serving, Suncrest United Methodist Church here in Morgantown, had started some recovery work, and he left. He got reappointed. And on his way out the door, he said, "You're in charge of the recovery ministry now." And I said, "I don't want to." And he said, "Well, you're it." And so I took over the recovery ministry that we were trying to start and worked with a team at the church for about a year to start a recovery ministry. And we opened our doors, and people from the community started to show up. And I started to meet folks in our community that had never crossed the threshold of our church before, and people who were looking and struggling and working really hard to get right with God and to get right with each other and to find long-term sobriety. Um, we started to work with a local organization that housed folks, and people would be there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they wouldn't come back. And I would say to someone, "What happened to so and so?" And they would say they went back out. And honestly, I got tired of people not having the support and the systems that they needed, and I got tired of seeing people die. And so I made the decision at that point that I was going to start a nonprofit, and I started a nonprofit that utilized housing, both parsonages and other housing, to house individuals who were in recovery long term. We opened our doors March 1st of 2021, and we still are operating, housing folks and seeing transformation and change happen in really very real ways. When you get involved in recovery work, it will absolutely change you because you have a front row seat to miracles. And so getting to see the miraculous work that God does in people's lives was one of those things that I couldn't quit. And this is not what I expected my life to look like, but sometimes God has plans that we wouldn't anticipate. And that work in recovery really messed me up. So Jesus really messed me up. And here I am years later now doing this full time for my job. So you never know where God's going to lead. Um, I want to pop some slides up here and we can start to talk through them. And again, as Bill mentioned, please, if you have questions or comments or feedback, please pop those in the Q&A section, and I would be happy to answer those and to be in conversation with you as we go along. So as Bill mentioned, I work for the Fletcher Group. The Fletcher Group is a national organization that was founded by the former governor of Kentucky, and we work all over the country helping folks, particularly in rural communities, but in many communities, build the recovery ecosystem. So build the support that people need to be successful in recovery long term. And my work is to try and help churches figure out that they can and should be involved in this. And I really believe that churches can and should be involved in this because the need that exists is in our church, it's in our pews, and it is the heartbeat of our mission. The work that we're called to do to bring healing and wholeness includes working with folks who are in long-term recovery and folks who are struggling to find long-term recovery. The numbers in the United States say that about 14% of people have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder. That's probably underrepresented as to the actual folks that struggle with substances. What that means is that in every church, in every congregation, there are either people that are struggling or there are people that love people that are struggling. In every community, there are people who are struggling and trying to find a way forward. And so, for us to do the work that God has called us to, means that we meet people on the front lines, we open our eyes to see the needs, and we find ways to be engaged in practical, compassionate work. This is deeply connected to the values that we have as the people of God, and it's deeply connected to the work that we do in engaging our community. Sometimes we don't want to pay attention to it, and sometimes I've met churches that would rather not talk about it. I was working with a project in another state far away, and I called a church to talk about this work that we were doing and said, "Hey, we're hoping to do some recovery work in your community. Can I talk to somebody in your church that maybe is involved in that, or is there anybody that you would know that would be interested in recovery work?" And the secretary politely told me that we don't have that problem here. And I thought, well, that's strange because none of the numbers show that. But we had a lovely little chat, and she said, "Are you ever going to come down to visit us?" And I said, "Well, sometime I might come down." She said, "Well, when you come down, you'll see where our church is. You'll see what a beautiful building it is. You'll see what a great place it is, and you'll see all the places around us that maybe aren't as nice because right across the street, just last week, there was a pretty big drug bust." And I thought, 3 sentences ago, you told me that we don't have that problem here. And now you're telling me that across the street was a drug bust. Both of those things can't be true. But it's pretty amazing how we can isolate ourselves from the reality of the world around us and not see the ways that we can serve. Sometimes that's just denial. Sometimes it is the fact that we just don't know what to do. We don't know what steps to take. We don't know what we have to offer. We're unsure how to move forward. I want us to understand what substance use is and what it's not. Substance use is not a moral failing. It is not just a sinful way of living. And sometimes the church has gotten a bad rap because we talk about substance use disorder as if it were a moral failing or as if it was just a sinful way of being. A substance use disorder is a treatable medical condition that encompasses a number of aspects and components. And it has physical components, it has emotional components, it has mental components, and it has spiritual components. And so when we are helping people engage this well, we are touching on all of those areas. There are places in our community that will help with the physical kind of components of substance use disorder. There are places in our community, counselors and support that will offer the mental support that people need. There are places in our community, in the rooms of AA and NA, that offer the emotional support that people need. But not a lot of places offer the spiritual support that people need. And for us to step into our role well as the church, we need to figure out what it looks like to really offer that spiritual support and to make sure that people have the opportunity to really engage well with what this looks like. Um, One of the things that we say in recovery work consistently is that recovery is not just possible, recovery is probable with the right supports. So we hear stories about all the challenges that people face, and those are very real. But I want you to understand recovery is not just possible, recovery is probable with the right supports. And as leaders in the church, as churches and communities, as people who are on the front lines of this kind of work, you are the folks that have the opportunity to help provide the right supports, to help show up in ways that people need so that we can be supportive and engaged. One of the deadliest barriers to helping people find healing is stigma. Stigma is this primary idea that builds shame around um, challenging issues. Particularly, we talk about it when it comes to substance use and other things that we would rather not talk about. Stigma says we're not allowed to talk about the things that are actually happening in our life, and it creates a culture of silence and shame. Stigma makes us put on masks, and it doesn't allow us to talk well about the things that are actually happening in our lives or in the world. Stigma in our communities will stop people from seeking the help that they need because the work of shame is too powerful. Dr. Christopher Jones has worked in some different areas, and one of the things he says is no one should die because stigma stopped them from seeking treatment. No one should die because stigma stopped them from seeking treatment. One of the things that we do as faith communities is we open up conversations around challenging issues so that stigma doesn't get the final say. We open up conversations around challenging issues so that shame does not rule the day. I tell people all the time, and I believe this very deeply, shame is never from God. Shame is never from God because God invites a deeper sense of openness, vulnerability, and connection, and shame pushes all that away. And so when we're working in places where shame becomes the primary motivating factor, that is never the good life that God has for us. It's never the opportunity that God wants us to live into. One of the things that we need to start to think about in the faith community is how we talk about and engage and care for folks with a substance use disorder. So it's not something that has to be kept quiet, but so it's something that can be discussed honestly and openly so that people can find the healing that they need. One of the easiest ways to do this, and I encourage folks to do this really, really in a simple way, is to include in your morning pastoral prayers praying for folks in your community that are in recovery, or praying for folks in your community that are impacted by substance use disorder, praying in your morning prayer that the church can be a place of healing and hope for folks that are trying to find their way forward. Just by mentioning that in our prayer time means that we're allowed to talk about it. It's not a huge step, but it is a step that starts to say, we understand that this is happening, and we believe that there can be opportunity for this to be discussed. No one should die because stigma stopped them from seeking treatment. And I think as the church, we have the opportunity to really give shape to that conversation around what substance use looks like, who it impacts, and the ways that people can find hope and healing. One of the things that we have to do when we work on that is we have to make sure that the words and the language that we're using doesn't create stigma, but instead creates opportunities for people to be successful and to be seen. And we want to make sure that the language that we use builds dignity around folks who struggle and sees in each person the God-given dignity and reality that has been placed there. Rabbi Abraham Joseph Heschel says that words create worlds. And so the words that we use create the world that we want to live in. And so it's important that we watch some of our language. We want to really use person first language. Uh, in many places in the faith community, we try not to use the word addict. Instead, we talk about a person with a substance use disorder. That gets confusing sometimes because sometimes people who have lived recovery experience will refer to themselves that way. But we're going to work to make sure that we're going to talk with dignity and connection rather than using language that can other someone. We want to avoid terms like getting clean. People are not inherently dirty. People are not inherently wrong. So we're going to talk about people who are pursuing recovery or people who are in treatment. We're going to focus on the health components. We're going to focus on the changes that people make, not the morality issues around it. So any language that dehumanizes or disconnects is language that we don't want to use. We want to find ways to honor people's experience and to make sure that people have the opportunity to be seen and known and loved in the midst of that. There is no right way for people to recovery. Recovery can find many, many pathways. One of the ways that you probably have seen in your community would be the 12-step programs, AA, NA, GA, CA. There's lots of, of programs that have an A in them. And I used to tell the folks that I worked with regularly, like, go to a meeting that has letters. If it's got initials, you can go to it and go to it to make sure that you're finding the connection that you need there. Your churches might host an AA or an NA program. You've got those places that they meet in your space and in your sanctuary and in your basement, and that's a lovely thing. That is a really good step into making sure that folks have an opportunity to find the connection and the points that they need to live really well. So that's one of those pathways that people use. They can pursue that. That way they're finding connection with other folks and they're finding kind of the principles, the spiritual principles that guide them through the process. There's also really specific faith-based programs. Celebrate Recovery is probably the most well-known faith-based program. It comes out of Saddleback Church. It's connected to the to the Beatitudes. It draws from the 12 steps, but instead of 12 steps, they talk about 8 principles. And there is curriculum that churches can put in place to learn how to build a recovery ministry around Celebrate Recovery. There's lots of other ones, though. Life Recovery Ministry is one of the ones that works. There's recovery ministries, faith based programs that speak to people of different faiths and different backgrounds. And so there's that's one of those pathways that people can follow to be successful. There's also more clinical pathways. So clinical pathways include treatment programs, counseling, outpatient services, rehab, 28-day programs, and they include folks that are able to receive support through medication-assisted treatment like Suboxone or methadone that helps them build the foundation that they need to be successful long term. Those are those areas that many of our communities see. We sometimes see that people go to a 28-day program and we somehow think that that's going to be all that they need when that is just the beginning of the journey of recovery. And then one of the other main kind of supporting pathways that exists for folks in recovery is being connected to peers. So people who have lived experience in recovery and who get to bear witness to the way that they walk that journey and to the way that they came through that and help other people navigate some of those barriers and some of those journeys. Um, One of the things that I think is so powerful about the work of recovery, and one of the reasons that I think that it's needed in our churches in a real way, is because recovery is spread through the word of testimony. When we say, "This is how I did it, this is what happened to me," and then many times when you're in the room, you'll hear people say, "If God did it for me, God can do it for you," right? And there becomes this belief that the word of our testimony is that thing that encourages other people to walk along that pathway. I think we need more words of our testimony in the church, more stories about how God has changed lives, about how communities have been different, more stories about the ways that things have been made new. And our ability to learn from folks in recovery, to tell the stories of transformation and change that we have experienced, and to invite other people to come along with us in that process is one of those powerful things. One of the things I hope you hear in this whole presentation is that people who are folks who are in recovery, who are in our communities, who are in our churches, who are kind of walking that journey, they bring gifts to our churches and to our communities that cannot be overlooked. Resiliency, self examination, gratitude, connection, honesty, integrity, the values and virtues and gifts that folks in recovery are learning can be and should be a gift to our faith communities as we can watch what it looks like to live well. And so I don't want us to say, oh, this is just us putting people aside. This is us othering people. This is an opportunity to learn from folks who have walked a journey that is deeply connected to discipleship and are showing us how to do it. And so the things that we can learn from folks in recovery as the church is powerful. There really is an incredibly powerful symbiotic relationship that exists as the faith community provides opportunities for connection and support, and as individuals in recovery then teach us what it looks like to live well and to live an honest and open and vulnerable life. When you find that connection, it works in a really beautiful way. I've heard it said, and I think it's true, that if a church were to have 10% of the folks who attend that church be folks who were in active recovery, it would change the whole dynamic of that church because there would be more honesty and more openness. There'd be better conversations. There'd be more connection. Bill, you're popping on screen, which
I'm
makes me think
popping
you have
on
a question
screen.
or
You
a
have a
comment.
question. So
All right, I'm ready.
you were talking about substance use disorder, and one of our participants
Mhm.
asked, "Do you feel it necessary to have a substance use disorder in order to assist others?"
Great question. So I am not a person who has a substance use disorder. I didn't. I've never had a substance use disorder. I have got my own stuff that I work with, and one of the things that's benefited me in this process was I have worked the 12 steps just like anybody else who's been in that situation, and so I've taken my own challenges, my own stumbling blocks, my own addictions that I struggle with, even if they're not substances, and I've worked those through that 12-step process. And that is a life changing experience. And I would encourage anybody to do that because it really will be a life changing experience. That's one of the beautiful components of Celebrate Recovery is that it's not just for folks with a substance use disorder, but it's for anyone with a hurt habit or hang up that they really want to begin to address. So In one way, I'm going to say no, but in another way, I'm going to say, if you're going to be someone who doesn't have a substance use disorder but wants to work with people with substance use disorder, you have to learn to listen well. And so you have to invest time into hearing the stories and the voices and the experiences of people who have walked that journey. And you have to understand that you are not the expert in the room. You're not the one that has all the answers and knows all the things. And so you get to be a recovery ally to help elevate the voices and the conversations and to listen and to celebrate and to cheer people on in that process. There's a beautiful book by Allison Jones Webb called Recovery Allies. And if you're not someone who has a substance use disorder, but you want to work with folks who've had a substance use disorder or in recovery, that's a great place to start to learn how to continue to have those conversations and to be a learner and listener that brings to light the challenges that people face. Thank you for that question. That was a great question. Bill, you're muted,
I
so
know
there you
I
go.
am, and you would think after doing this for so many years I would learn that.
We'd all learn.
You you raised, particularly on this current slide, the 12-step programs, and
Mhm.
I asked in the chat how many churches currently host recovery programs. You may get into this, but how can a church begin to engage with recovery groups that are meeting in their building?
Well, I will get into that. So we
I will
can.
let you
So
do that when
if you
when
let me
you're
keep
ready.
going, we'll get
Keep
there. We'll
going.
start to talk about what it looks like to make sure that we're creating spaces that are welcoming to folks for sure. So thank you for that. All right. One of the resources that I want us to begin to realize and understand what it looks like is there is something called recovery capital. Recovery capital is a researched, studied, validated idea that says that when people have the opportunity to build the resources that they need for recovery, they can move into long-term recovery. And there's three different kind of components to recovery capital: personal capital, social capital, and community capital. Um, this is a really powerful thing when we start to realize that there are opportunities for folks to really build in a new way of living. And this is what I want us to understand. When we're talking about recovery capital, we're not talking about sobriety, we're talking about recovery. And sometimes recovery and sobriety are not the same thing. So, recovery is an opportunity to build a new life, to build something different than what you've had, and to build a new way of living. Sobriety means that you stop using a substance. Sobriety is defined by what you don't use. Recovery is defined by the way that you build something new that continues to empower your sobriety, but it also empowers a new way to live. It builds a different way, a different structure than maybe what you've had before in your life. And so you learn new skills and new opportunities, and you make new connections that allow you to kind of build that out. And so recovery capital is the way that we start to think about ways that those things get built out. And the definition hits these three areas: personal capital, social capital, and community capital. I think that faith communities have a really unique opportunity to make significant impacts in the areas of recovery capital. I think that faith communities have the skills, the people, the resources, and the assets to really help people build the recovery capital that's necessary long term in their lives. So, this is what each of these are, right? Personal capital are the resources that people have internally that allow them to build this new way of living and allow them to build recovery. That can be skills, that can be self esteem, that can be health, that can be a new and greater sense of purpose. And that's what people are starting to build around themselves that allows them to figure out how to take those next steps. That can be somebody who's learning how to interview for a job or carry on a conversation or figure out a new way to connect. I think that churches and faith communities can play a role in helping people build personal recovery capital resources by helping people talk about meaning and purpose and what that looks like, by offering spiritual guidance and connection, by helping people build the soft skills that are necessary in order to be successful. Many churches that I go to have an abundance of folks who may have figured out, have been in the business world, know what it means to interview somebody, know what they're looking for, what an employer is possibly looking for. And so for them to come and say, we're going to help you build a way to interview and to build the soft skills that you need to get a really good job. That's one of those ways that you begin to build that personal capital and what that looks like. As we talk through these things, I want you to start to think about what resources your faith community has now at your disposal to help build these in communities. And you can overwhelm Bill in the Q&A. I didn't ask him for that. I'm just saying it. Put these things, share these things. What resources do you have? What ideas do you have that would help people build these resources and these capital? Social capital is connected to relationships. Social capital is connected to the support that people build in their lives that allow them to be successful in recovery. So it's people who are sober friendships, it's supportive families, it's connections to the larger community and to what that looks like. One of the things that we talk about is we talk about these positive social relationships and these connections and webs that really bring people together. One of the challenges that many people in recovery face is they have to rebuild their entire way of connecting. In the rooms of AA and NA, they say you need new people, places, and things. You need new people, places, and things. And so to rebuild those social relationships is really challenging. And to rebuild those social relationships, particularly with family that maybe have burnt all the bridges that existed there. Maybe there's not a lot of trust that existed between people. And so finding ways to help people build that social relationship and that social connection is so important. So again, you can host support groups in your church. You can make sure that there's materials about your faith community and what you offer and invitations for folks to come back and to join you at gatherings or at a meal. You can build these welcoming small groups. You can have people in your church who become trained to be mentors or connecting points for folks who are in recovery. And you can help build these social relationships. One of the things that we do so well in the church is we build social capital, right? We build community, we build connection, we build relationship. And so for us to be able to extend that and to show that is a powerful thing. But when I was in seminary, I took a class around the ethics of community and what community looks like that's done really well. And community that is really life changing is based on gratitude, truth telling, promise keeping, and radical hospitality. So, community that gives shape to people's lives is based on gratitude, truth telling, promise keeping, and radical hospitality. And so, in the church, as we build our connections, as we build our relationships, as we build our ways of doing things when it comes to gratitude, when it comes to truth telling, when it comes to following through, that really starts to build these capital pieces and these capital components in. The third resource are kind of the external assets, the community capital that people need in order to be successful. So that's the things that get them to safe housing, that gets them to transportation, that helps them access second chance employers, that helps them get connected to therapists or outpatient care, to those kind of things that help them meet those needs that they have. I'm going to tell you that one of the biggest challenges that people face in early recovery is that they need transportation. And depending on where you live, transportation is really, really hard. One of the biggest needs that people have when they come into early recovery is they may not have the personal capital when it comes to a driver's license. They don't have a driver's license. They don't have a valid state ID. And it's hard to get a job if you don't have a valid state ID. It's hard to get a state ID if you don't have the money to get a state ID. It's hard to get a state ID in general. I don't know how many times you've had to go to the DMV and then go home from the DMV and get the 5 documents that you missed before you went to the DMV and then make another trip and then go back. I swear to you, the last time I got my driver's license renewed, it took me 3 trips to the DMV because I kept bringing the wrong paperwork. One of the things that I think churches can do, and one of the things that I think is a really easy step that any size church can do, is you can reach out to organizations in your community that are doing recovery work and say, we will train people in our church to be DMV navigators. So that when someone new comes into a recovery house, when someone new comes into the recovery community, there are 2 or 3 folks that will go get them and take them to the DMV and say, these are the forms that you need. This is what you're going to do. And sometimes churches will even start a fund that will help people pay $15 to $20 that's necessary to get a valid state ID so that people can start to work. Because the spiral that happens when people can't get a job because they can't get an ID, they can't get an ID because they don't have a job, this is just a really bad cycle. And helping people take that step and access that community resource is one of those life changing things. Small things that we can do that build a really big, have a really significant impact. Bill, is there stuff that people are putting in the Q&A or the chat about recovery capital that we want to talk about?
I am going to have to say, not necessarily
Okay,
recovery
fair enough.
capital, but somebody has a question from an earlier slide about celebrate
Great.
recovery.
Okay.
And they are a pastor who is in recovery from alcohol and is
Okay.
feeling called to work in recovery ministry. They have multiple AA and NA groups with 50 plus attending meetings throughout the week.
Wow.
In talking with them, people say that what keeps them from coming to worship is the stigma they feel.
Yep.
Would introducing a celebrate recovery group be the best option to start that spiritual ministry to get individuals comfortable with church, or are there other options?
Yes. So yes and no. Okay. So celebrate recovery to start a celebrate recovery can be a pretty big lift. It can be a challenge in terms of getting the number of people needed to run a celebrate recovery really well, and so that can be a big lift. One of the things that I might suggest is that you use the life recovery curriculum. There's a life recovery Bible study that's pretty user friendly. And so if there are folks through your building that are looking for the spiritual component, you might say, "Hey, we're going to offer this as an opportunity from folks in our congregation and for folks in the recovery community to meet together and to have a Bible study together and to use this life recovery Bible study curriculum that's built on the 12 steps." It's a much easier lift to get started than a celebrate recovery. A celebrate recovery ministry is really powerful and can really be transformative to a community, but it's going to require building folks from your church that are interested in that process. It's going to take probably a year's worth of training to train the leaders that are necessary in order to do that. And so that might be a long term goal, but the first step you could take would be using something like the life recovery curriculum.
And I'm just trying to put a link in the chat. Is that the Life Recovery Workbook
Yep,
from Stephen Otterburn?
that's the one.
All right, we're going to put that link in the chat. Um, Now, if somebody wanted to get trainings um, in recovery support groups, where could they do that?
Yeah. So if you want to learn about what you mean, like in your community or how to run a recovery support group, or what do you think the question is there?
Do you train churches to begin a recovery
Oh,
support group?
me? Yes, I do actually.
Okay.
So personally, I do that. So this is the beautiful thing about my job is I will help churches build a strategic plan to help them figure out how they step into the recovery space that's happening in their community. So how do they build the partnerships? How do they meet the needs? How do they figure out what they can do and where they can be connected? And so yeah, absolutely. That's a large part of what I do is I help people figure out how to take those next steps. And so you can email me and we would be happy to set up a conversation about how you can build this kind of program out or build up these partnerships and better understand the needs in your community and how you meet them for sure.
Final
Absolutely.
question at this point. If a program like NAAA are to be anonymous, how does the church begin to invite people to engage?
Yeah. So what you're gonna begin with is with you're gonna begin with paper. You're gonna begin with a little pamphlet and a gift from the church that says like, "Hey, join us." You're gonna leave that. People can pick it up on their way in and to out of the building. You're not going to show up and try and talk to people who are there, right? You're going to invite people to come back at a time at their choosing to engage and to be connected with you. That's one of those kind of inroads, right? You're going to start the invitation process gradually and carefully by leaving things and by offering information that people can take and can come back on their own process and in their own kind of way of being. But you're not just going to show up and knock on the doors and do that kind of work. what happens is when there are folks from your church who are in recovery and who attend those meetings and can be the invitation to say, hey, I would love to have you come with me on a Sunday, or we're starting this Bible study, I'd love to have you participate. That's a beautiful thing. And so as a minister or a leader in the church, part of what you're going to do is you're going to talk about recovery enough that people who are in recovery feel comfortable saying to you, hey, I'm in recovery, or my son's in recovery, or my kid's in recovery. And so it's not something that we cover up, but it's something that we talk about. And those folks help build that bridge and that connection as well.
And I would add the people who I know who are in recovery would be very turned off by someone from a church showing up and beginning to invite
Right.
them. But just providing the space and providing like a really nice space
Yep.
says a lot to those in the recovery community.
Yeah. And just information about if somebody wants to pick it up and know, like there's better ways to do that. But yeah, there's ways that you can do that by not just showing up and trying to, people aren't going to come out if you're doing that for sure. So perfect. All right,
All
we'll
right,
keep
thank you.
going.
Carry on.
One of the things that I really think that people in recovery need from our faith community are kind of four different things. And these are based on the conversations that I've had and based on the people that I speak with and talk to and all the work that I do. So the first thing I think that people need is they need a church that's going to offer radical hospitality. Hospitality is if you want to get me started on a soapbox, we can jump into that when it comes to hospitality, because I think hospitality is one of the most countercultural things that we can do as Christians. I think offering hospitality that goes beyond setting out the fine china or welcoming our friends but hospitality that really welcomes strangers into our midst is one of those radical, life changing things that happens for us and for the people that we welcome. When you read through the Old Testament, there is time after time after time where hospitality is a key theme. Hospitality is a key theme. And hospitality in the Old Testament was a life and death matter. Maybe I set up my camp and I set up the place where I'm staying, and Bill comes wandering through and he wanders into my camp. And if I say, you can't stay, then he's going to wander back out into the wilderness and he's going to die. But if I say, hey, you can stay here and I'm going to feed you and I'm going to give you some water, I'm going to give you a place to stay and a place to sleep, that work of hospitality, of welcoming a stranger into our midst, literally saves a life. I want us to realize something. The conversation that we are having about recovery and about substance use disorder is a life and death conversation. It really is. It's a life and death conversation. I started to look recently and started to think, if we rang a church bell for one time for every person that overdosed in the United States in 2024, that's when we have the most recent data. But if we rang our church bells one time for every person that overdosed in the United States, we would ring our church bells for 4 days straight. Just ding, 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 4 days, right? This is a life and death matter. And our ability to practice radical hospitality, intentional welcome, intentional care, our ability to really create spaces where people know that they're known and loved is crucial to this whole component. The other thing we need to really begin to think about how we offer is this work of non-judgmental support. It's a commitment to listen without fixing, and its ability to love people without condition. When you learn how to run a Celebrate Recovery group, so if you've been involved in Celebrate Recovery, or if you've been involved in a mutual support group, right? One of the things you learn is you don't give people advice; you give people an opportunity and a place to share. And so somebody can come in and share their experience, and no matter what it is, no matter what they tell you, you say, "Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing." Right? It's that non-judgmental support. It's that ability to listen and not say, I have to fix your problems, I have to fix this thing, but it's this ability to be connected to someone that's so powerful. Offering predictable, safe spaces, so reliable spaces where people know they're physically safe and emotionally safe is one of those components. And then just offering opportunities for people to belong, where they move from guest to member to volunteer to person that participates. So one of the things that I mentioned in my intro is when I was serving in the local church, I decided to start some recovery housing. And the local church was very supportive of that, and they continue to be really supportive of that. One of the things that happens when people move into the recovery house that we started, it's its own separate nonprofit, it's its own thing, but they have an opportunity to go up to the church and to volunteer, to connect, and the church will sometimes help them with their initial move-in fee. So if they come up for a day and volunteer and work around the church and just be there, the church helps them with their initial move-in fee. What that does is it creates connection and relationship. So I have this distinct memory of a lady who went up to the church to volunteer, and she came back and she said, "I have to tell you what happened today." And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, I got to the church, and they were all about to have a meeting, and they asked me if I would answer the phone during their meeting." She's like, "So they told me how to answer the phone, and I answered their phone the whole time during the meeting." She said, "Nobody's trusted me to do that, maybe ever." She said, "I'm going up next week. I'm going to answer the phone during their meeting," right? This person went from outsider to volunteer really quickly, but it changed her life and her perspective because there was an opportunity to belong, not to be just an outsider, but to participate in the work of ministry and to support what was happening. That's life changing. Last week, just last week, and again, I'm not the pastor of this church anymore. I still go there; they still let me come. But last week, three or four of the folks from the recovery house graduated from a workforce development program, and the pastor and the secretary and the lay leader all showed up at this graduation. I saw a picture of it later. There was these two guys that had been connected to our recovery house who got connected to the church through this volunteer opportunity and continue to go back and build the connection and build the space. And they graduated from this workforce program, and there were probably 8 to 10 people from the church that showed up to celebrate their graduation. Apparently, everybody else at the graduation was like, who are all these folks, right? Why do these people come? Well, because this was a church that created an opportunity to belong. It created a place where there's non-judgmental support. It created radical hospitality and radical welcome. It's a beautiful thing. Bill.
You reminded me of something, Matthew, and to go back to the earlier questions about engaging with the recovery groups. I told you this. I had just gotten back Saturday from a conference in Ocala, Florida, around fresh expressions. And one of the gatherings they had at St. Mark's United Methodist Church in Ocala is a
Yeah.
community table dinner right
Yes.
before and a bookend between their recovery group meetings. So people go to a recovery group meeting, stay for dinner, people eat dinner, and then go to a recovery group meeting. And it was a vision of the kingdom of God, of all of these different people joining together around the table. So that was just like a good entry level ministry that this church is offering. But then we have a question in the Q&A for somebody who is from Baltimore City, and they're ministering to people on the streets. They're meeting people who are uh, with substance use disorder at ground zero, people who want
Mhm.
treatment and are in need of treatment, but this is their first contact, and the person they're in contact with is under the influence. So, as a first responder, as a first contact, what's the best practice to help them into treatment, or who should they be partnering with in order to
Yeah.
see this through?
So if you have any opportunity as a ministry leader to learn the skills that can be found in motivational interviewing, that's one of the most powerful skill sets that you can learn. And you can read about motivational interviewing. You can find places to practice motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing really helps people connect to their own internal motivation around the work that they want to do. Because I really believe that nobody who's in active use, that's not what they wanted for themselves. That wasn't what they said they wanted to be when they grew up, right? This is not the life they envisioned for themselves. And so we want to help people kind of tap into that motivation for themselves rather than say, here's what you have to do. So the first thing I really want to encourage you to do is to learn the skills found in motivation interviewing, which is asking a question, reflecting, giving people that opportunity to kind of explore that for themselves. But the other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to really become an expert on the folks in your community where people can go to find that support. So I know my community, if somebody comes to me and says, I want treatment, I'm actively, Maybe I've been actively using, I'm under the influence right now, but I want to get sober. I want treatment. My job is to take them to the emergency room. In the local emergency room, there are peers, there are peer staff, there are folks that will be there. They'll meet them, they'll help them sober out, and then we'll connect them to the initial 28-day treatment resources that exist. I don't know what they are in Baltimore City, but your role is to find the medical intervention that's there that will get them connected to that treatment. Because that initial step from active use to treatment needs to be a medical step, because there needs to be a medical detox opportunity. There needs to be an opportunity for someone to access the resources that they need around medication assisted treatment and some of those other things to begin to build that long term sobriety process. And so, who are the medical providers? Talk to your EMS folks. You know, if your EMS came upon somebody, what would they do? Reach out to some of those kind of those very much first responders in your community and say, if I have this, who do I call? Who do I talk to? What do you do? Build those relationships and learn what's there so that you've got a better idea. The other thing that I want us to say about what our faith communities need, and this is not necessarily what people in recovery need, but I really want you to encourage you to think about this. I strongly believe that every faith community in the United States should have Narcan on site and should have several folks who know where it is and know how to administer that Narcan. Right? Narcan, if you're not familiar, will override an overdose. It's mostly just a little nasal spray, and so it's not hard to administer. You can learn how to do it pretty quickly. Health departments train you. There's a lot of community organizations that train you in Narcan, but you should absolutely have Narcan on site and know how to use it. Not just for people in recovery, but because there are folks in our congregations who are taking medication that could cause an overdose, even if they're taking it responsibly. I've worked with some churches that had older folks in the congregation who were taking medication to manage pain, and before they came to church, they accidentally took it twice instead of once, and came to church and started to have a reaction to that, and they were able to administer Narcan. Right, so every church should have Narcan available in the congregation and should have numerous people that know how to use it. You should have it available. And if you personally don't carry Narcan, you should consider it. I have Narcan on me all the time because you never know when you get to save a life. And that's a powerful thing. And friends, if we don't believe that there's life that comes after death, nobody does. That's our story. We better hold to it. We better really believe it, because that's what that really looks like. And so I really want you to encourage folks and churches to have access to that, because that is a life-saving, life-changing medicine and opportunity. So here's a question. What are the barriers, both visible and invisible, that exist in your community that stop people from accessing recovery? What are the barriers that exist? Are the barriers that there's not enough transportation? Are the barriers that there's not housing, so that people who are pursuing recovery come out of a treatment center and don't have a place to go? Are the barriers that people don't have access to an ID? Are there barriers that there's not opportunities for job or workforce development? What are the barriers that exist in your community right now? And how do we start to think about ways that we can meet those? Because I really believe that faith communities, that churches already have the assets that we need when it comes to space and people and innovation and the movement of the Holy Spirit that lets us begin to do this work. And so we need to start to think about, what are the barriers that exist? One of the things that you can find, and I can help you connect with, would be something called a recovery simulation event. Maybe some of you have done poverty simulation events. Those were popular and can still be used, where people come into a place and they learn kind of what it's like to navigate the systems that often folks who are in poverty have to navigate. A recovery simulation event is similar. Come in, you'll be given a folder with kind of your person, the person that you're going to be in this event, and you'll walk through the process of trying to navigate all the systems and structures that are there, that are in the room, without really knowing where things are, without really knowing what's happened. I have seen people who are holy people lose their minds in these recovery simulation events, because the barriers are so real and so significant. and the barriers that exist for the folks in our community when it comes to accessing services, when it comes to accessing treatment, when it comes to accessing the things that they need to build that recovery capital is very real. One of the first questions we have to start to ask ourselves is, what are the barriers that exist in our community right now? And how do we start to address those in a way that allows us to be successful and that allows people to build the resources that they need? Now, hear me out. We don't have to build all the resources. Okay. I'm not saying that you have to do all the things, but I am encouraging you to think about the folks in your community that you can partner with who are able to do the things. And that way you can make referrals and connections, and there can be this way of bringing people around. That's one of the powerful things here is you're not alone. There is partnership that exists. And when we're doing the work around recovery, thinking about all those components, the medical component and the physical component and the emotional component, you get to build partnerships, right? And so who are the folks that are already in your community? Start to dig into that. Who public health departments, recovery community organizations. These are often recognized organizations, drop-in centers that host meetings, that host job training opportunities, that host kind of connecting points for folks who are in recovery. Nonprofits that are doing the work around feeding folks, recovery houses, what's already there, and then start to build some partnerships. One of the things that I find in my work consistently is that while we may have resources in our community, they're often so siloed that we don't let people connect and talk. And so, what if the church became a place that would invite service providers to come once a month to a small meal and to have some conversation and to build relationships so we can start to break down those silos? That would be a powerful thing that could be transformative to your community. And then start to think about the unique resources and assets that your faith community brings to the table. You have resources and assets that exist. You've got volunteers. You've got a built in social network around communication that can be utilized to spread the word and to get the word out there when things need to happen. You have physical space and physical locations. I'm working with a church in rural West Virginia at this point that has 15 people that were attending there on a regular basis. They realized that they had a church that was built for much more than 15 people. But through a variety of reasons, the neighborhood changed, the church aged, they were not necessarily using all the space. And so they built a partnership with a local nonprofit to open a recovery community organization in their church. So they share the space, they use their fellowship hall. And so there's an organization that runs health clinics. There's an organization that runs a drop-in center for people during the winter to come in during the day and to stay warm. There's an organization that creates opportunities for people to find and get connected to GED training or to literacy training. And the church can then be the support around that too. Because so someone from the church was a teacher, and so they said to this organization, "Well, I'll teach a GED literacy class," and so that people come and they learn how to do that, are working towards their GEDs. That's one of the churches where they work with folks to get their licenses, and so people can drop in, and 3 days a week, the folks from the church will be there to take them to the DMV to get a license. They're using their space and the resources that they have as a small church to make a big impact. It's not costing them a lot of money. It's not costing them a huge investment of time, but it's people that have caught the vision through a conversation for what could be in their community, and they've started to really lean into that. One of the incredible things about this little church is they have a parsonage that's literally attached to their church. It's one of those old school, churches that the parsonage is literally, they share a wall, and they said we want to house people, and so they worked with a nonprofit to renovate the building, to renovate the parsonage. They now house 12 men in that parsonage that's connected to the church. The church actually receives income from renting their old parsonage to the recovery house, and they receive a built-in ministry center, a built-in ministry site. They are literally sharing a wall, and they're still doing the work. It's a beautiful thing. This is that organization. It's called Compassion Central. It's a ministry in West Virginia. It's building that out. There's also a small church I worked with called Johnson's Chapel that rented their parsonage to the recovery housing that I wanted to start. And in doing so, built this incredible connecting point between the folks in recovery and the church. And one of the neat things that happened was they were getting money from that. And eventually, We realized that there was a family, a couple, a married couple. They'd been married 19 years. They both entered recovery together. For a while, one of them lived in he lived in our men's house and she lived in our women's house. Um, but we realized that they needed a place to live together and to reunite with their family and all this kind of stuff. And so they took over the lease from Abundant Life, and they live there now with their kid and have built this whole new life and have a connection to the church. And it is just a beautiful thing when we start realizing that we have the space to use our resources, our space resources, our connecting resources, our people resources. That can be a really significant way forward. Um, and then this is me. I can help you do it. I'm 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 fortunate that thanks to the funding that my group finds, I get to coach and support and train and strategize with folks at little to no cost. And so, if you want to call me, I will help you figure out what assets exist and how you can be a better partner in this work. But I would love to provide coaching and support to your organization, to your church, to help you figure out how to take this next step. Bill, you popped up on the screen, and I was wrapping up here.
That is perfect. I want to let you wrap up because I've got some more partnership information for people
Great.
whenever you're ready.
I, I'm ready. This is my slide right here, my email address, mjohnson@fletchergroup.org. You can find more about us at fletchergroup.org in general. And I'm more than willing to help you do whatever you need to do to build this out in your church because I think it will change your church and the community. And in doing so, I think it'll change the world. So there you go, Bill. What partnership do you have to share?
I'm going to drop a resource that I think you might want to be aware of too, Matt. For those in both the Baltimore-Washington and Peninsula Delaware conferences, we have a process called missional action planning that is designed to help churches kind of discover what's the ministries that they could do in their community. And we have somebody, our Director of Connectional Ministry and Chief Program Officer, Christy Latona, who does 30-minute consultations that if your church is feeling a call to a particular ministry and one that may need to use their building, you can get in contact with her to talk more about the missional action planning process. That link
Great.
is in the website, or in the link to the website is in the chat. I would also add for churches in the Baltimore-Washington conference, you have a partnership that we just began July 1st. Every church in the Baltimore-Washington conference is now in a collaborative hub, geographically based for mission and ministry. This first year, we're getting to know one another in our hubs. They're beginning to be organized in the Peninsula Delaware Conference as well. But as these hubs are being organized, different ideas for ministries that churches could do together are bubbling up, and this could possibly be a good ministry endeavor for a hub. So you may want to talk to your, if you're a lay person, talk to your pastor. If you're a clergy person, talk to your connecting pastor. If you're in the Peninsula Delaware Conference, talk to your district superintendent. And if you don't know who else to talk to me. We'll get you connected. These are all and a lot of the training Tuesdays that we are offering this spring, kicking off tonight with Matt, are different ways your hubs and your communities can partner together to bring about ministry because we truly believe that we are better together and we can do more together than any one of our churches can do on their own. So thank you so much for kicking off the spring season for us, Matt. As we're concluding, I would like to invite everyone to drop a thank you to Matt in the chat. You've asked some good questions tonight. Um, if you could say your
Thank you.
email address again, Matt, I will drop it in the chat
Yeah,
for everybody.
it's just M Johnson, MJOHNSON at fletchergroup.org.
I'm dropping that in the chat if you want to get a hold of Matt. What a wonderful offer. And again, we have recorded tonight. It will be posted later this week, early next week on both the Baltimore-Washington, the Peninsula Delaware Conference, and on the Episcopal area website. So you can't miss this, and please share it with other clergy, with other laity. So, Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me come be an influencer, as my dad said. So now
Well,
I
this
feel like I'm
you can tell your
internet
dad
famous.
when we post this, Matt. It will be on YouTube.
There
So
you go.
tell your
There you
dad that
go.
you are officially a YouTube influencer.
Good for me.
And you can add that to your resume and your CV. That will just be wonderful.
No,
Uh, our
thank
next
you so
oh,
much.
you're welcome. Our next training Tuesday will take place on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. We have one of our vitality specialists, TJ Mount, who will be talking to us about collaborative team ministry within the local church. So please sign up for that. You can find registration information at both the Baltimore-Washington Conference website, the Peninsula Delaware Conference website, and the Episcopal area website. We like to cover all of our bases around here, Matt, just so people can sign up. So again, thank you. This was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you all in a couple of weeks.